The Hamilton residence stood tall above the heart of Manhattan like a glass crown glinting in the morning sun. Yet inside those shining walls, darkness reigned. Richard Hamilton, a man the world knew as the architect of innovation, had built empires from the hum of circuitry and code. His company, Hamiltech, was synonymous with success, and his net worth had long passed the billion-dollar mark. But for all his fortune, Richard could not buy what he wanted most: light for his sons. Michael and Gabriel were twins, 7 years old, identical in face but divided in spirit. Both had been born blind, a genetic anomaly no doctor could cure, no operation could fix. Every attempt ended in heartbreak. Richard had flown specialists from Zurich, Paris, Tokyo, even Israel. Every consultation brought a fresh wave of hope, then crushed it with the same final verdict: your sons will never see. His wife, Eliza, had died during childbirth, leaving him with a wound that money could not heal. The penthouse became a museum of sorrow. Every room clinically perfect, every surface shining but the air hollow, lifeless. He had everything but laughter, and that morning, laughter felt like a language he no longer understood. The quiet house Richard's mornings followed precision. Wake at 5 a.m., exercise for 30 minutes, shower, and read the market updates before heading to his office on the 77th floor. Everything was timed to the minute. Control was the only thing he had left. The house itself was a silent masterpiece. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park, but the curtains stayed sealed tight. The walls were soundproofed to protect his sons from outside noise. Corners were padded, hallways wide. Technology ran the home: sensors, soft-voiced assistants, whispering machines that adjusted temperature and lighting automatically. But for all its sophistication, it felt like a mansion of mourning. Only two sounds echoed daily: the clicking of Richard's polished shoes on marble floors, and the gentle sobs of his boys upstairs. They never played outside, never felt sunlight, never saw their father's face. They only knew his voice. Calm, low, disciplined. The nanny Martha was in her late 50s, stern-faced, efficient, and thoroughly unfeeling. She had served the Hamiltons since Eliza's death, tending to the twins' daily routine. Breakfast, therapy, silence, nap, dinner, silence again. Martha had no patience for emotion. To her, pity was unproductive. "They're blind, not broken," she often muttered when others asked about the boys. "They'll adapt if they're disciplined enough." But inside the house, discipline had replaced joy. The twins no longer smiled when she entered. They only sat in their corner, whispering to each other, creating imaginary worlds where colors had sounds and sunlight sang like violins. "Michael," Gabriel said one afternoon as rain tapped against the window, "what do you think blue feels like?" "Maybe. Cool," Michael said thoughtfully. "Like when the air moves fast over your face." "And red?" "Warm, like Papa's hand when he holds mine." They built a language of imagination, painting their darkness with sound and touch. Martha didn't understand it. "Enough chatter," she said sharply. "Quiet time." The boys fell silent. The room returned to its empty hum. A job posting. 2 weeks later, an online job listing appeared. Housekeeper needed, discreet household. Upper East Side, must maintain confidentiality. Salary $3,000 week. Background check required. It was posted by Hamilton's assistant, Celia Carter. Among hundreds of applicants, one stood out: Isabella Johnson, a 31-year-old woman from Brooklyn with no fancy degrees, no elite experience. Her resume was plain: cleaning jobs, caregiving roles, and 6 years as a hospital assistant in the pediatric ward. But Celia noticed something unusual in the short note Isabella attached. "I understand what silence does to children. Sometimes it's not blindness that traps them. It's how the world stops believing in their light." Something in those words made Celia pause. By instinct, she forwarded it to Mr. Hamilton. He read it once, expression unreadable, and said simply, "Interview her." The interview, the next morning, the penthouse security called up from the lobby. "Sir, your 10 a.m. appointment is here. Send her up." Richard waited in his office, walls lined with sleek monitors displaying market graphs and silent news feeds. He wasn't expecting much. People often applied for the prestige, not the work. When the elevator opened, Isabella stepped out quietly. She wasn't what anyone imagined for a billionaire's staff. No polished accent. No designer clothes. She wore a neat white blouse, dark blue jeans, and sneakers that had clearly seen better days, but were spotless. Her hair was pulled back into a simple bun. Her eyes, however, were striking, calm, steady, full of something Richard hadn't seen in a long time. Empathy. Celia led her into the office. "Mr. Hamilton, this is Miss Johnson." Richard looked up. "You've worked in hospitals?" "Yes, sir," Isabella replied. "Mostly pediatric care. Cleaning, helping nurses, comforting families. Not exactly house management, no, sir. But I know how to keep things clean, and how to listen." Her tone was firm, respectful. Richard studied her a moment longer. "You understand," he said carefully. "My sons are special. I read the articles," she said softly. "I also understand that people with blindness don't need pity. They need patience." Something in her voice, gentle but resolute, made Richard's gaze flicker. He closed the folder. "You'll start Monday." Day 1. The first day began with quiet observation. Isabella noticed everything. The curtains that sealed away daylight. The soft hum of air purifiers. The way the twins' footsteps hesitated at every doorway. At breakfast, she watched them sit still, listening to the clink of their spoons as Martha placed plates before them. "Here," the nanny said briskly. "Oatmeal. Don't spill." "Yes, Miss Martha," the twins murmured. Richard passed by on his way to work, kissing their heads quickly but not speaking. He couldn't bear to stay long. Their small faces reminded him too much of Eliza. Once he left, silence swallowed the table again. Isabella's heart ached. She knew that kind of silence. Years ago, she'd taken care of her younger brother, Nathan, who had partial vision loss. Doctors had said it might improve, but it never did. He had died at 15 in a car accident, chasing the sound of laughter outside their small Brooklyn home. Ever since, Isabella had promised herself one thing. She would never let another child grow up feeling trapped in darkness. A gentle rebellion by noon. The house felt too still. Isabella had been warned by Celia. Don't interfere with therapy routines. Don't disturb the boys. Just clean. But as she polished the silver handles near the playroom, she heard muffled sobs. Peeking in, she saw the twins sitting cross-legged on the floor. Michael held his hands over his ears. Gabriel pressed his face into a pillow. Martha sat nearby scrolling through her tablet. "Quiet, both of you," she muttered. "Crying doesn't help," Isabella froze. Something inside her snapped, not anger, but resolve. She stepped forward softly, holding a small spray bottle and cloth. She sprayed once. Psst. The sound cut through the room like a soft whistle. Both boys lifted their heads, startled. "What was that?" Gabriel asked. "Cleaning magic," Isabella said gently. "Want to hear it again?" She sprayed once more, then once on the window glass. Psst. Psst. Michael smiled faintly. "It sounds happy." She smiled back, though they couldn't see it. "Would you like to help me listen?" "Tell me where the sound comes from." The twins tilted their heads, their tiny faces intent, alive. "Left," Gabriel said. "Near the wall," Michael added. "Perfect," Isabella said. "You're both sharper than me already." It was such a small thing, a game with sound, but it broke the invisible wall that hung in that room for years. Martha frowned. "Miss Johnson, please. They have therapy in 2 hours." "I know," Isabella said kindly. "I'm just helping clean the air." She kept her tone light, respectful, but her heart burned with determination. These children didn't need pity. They needed light, in whatever form it came. The first glimmer later that afternoon when Martha went to prepare lunch, Isabella stayed behind. She took a small toy from her bag, a wooden top that clicked as it spun. "You want to hear something fun?" she whispered. She twisted it on the table and let it spin. Click, click, click. Whir. The twins gasped, following the sound with their heads. "Over there," Michael pointed. "It's moving." Gabriel laughed. They both crawled toward the sound, fingers brushing the table's edge. Isabella gently moved the toy, making it spin again. Their laughter filled the room, light, pure, contagious. For the first time in 7 years, the walls heard something other than weeping. Isabella stood quietly, her eyes glistening. She looked toward the drawn curtains. The Manhattan morning light shimmered faintly beyond the fabric. She knew what she wanted to do, but she also knew she couldn't do it yet. One wrong move, and she'd lose her job. She glanced at the twins again. "Someday soon," she whispered, "you'll feel the warmth of the sun, not just on your skin, in your hearts." They didn't answer, but both smiled, sensing something new in her voice. Something the house hadn't heard in years. Hope. The next few days at the Hamilton penthouse unfolded with quiet transformations that went almost unnoticed. The marble floors still gleamed. The curtains stayed drawn. The clock still ticked in precise harmony. Yet something subtle had shifted. The air seemed lighter, as though the house itself was beginning to breathe again. And at the center of it all was Isabella Johnson, the woman hired to clean dust, but who was now quietly sweeping away despair. Morning light. Hidden light. Every morning Isabella arrived before sunrise, always in her white blouse and spotless jeans, carrying her little brown bag of tools. But inside that bag were not just cleaning supplies. She carried instruments of sound and light, clicking tops, textured cards, little bells, scent sticks, and her brother's old sensory exercises. Celia, the house manager, noticed how punctual she was. "You're early every day," she said one morning, offering Isabella a cup of coffee. Isabella smiled. "I like to greet the house before everyone wakes up." Celia laughed softly. "The house doesn't talk back, you know." Isabella only smiled again. Sometimes silence speaks too. That morning the twins were unusually restless. Michael kept tapping his fingers on the table while Gabriel hummed softly, as though feeling something in the air. Martha scolded them twice before Richard came down for breakfast. "Good morning, boys," he said flatly, adjusting his cufflinks. They both turned toward his voice, smiling. "Morning, Papa." "Eat your food," he murmured, distracted, scrolling through his phone. It wasn't that Richard didn't love his sons. He loved them so deeply that it hurt to even look at them. Every sound they made reminded him of the wife he had lost, the dream he could not restore. So he buried himself in work and avoided the one thing his children needed most: his presence. Isabella stood by the counter, pretending to polish a silver pitcher, but she watched carefully. She saw how Gabriel tried to reach for his father's hand, how Michael paused before saying something, only to shrink back when Richard left the table. Her heart tightened. This family was not broken by blindness, and it was broken by fear. The secret lesson that afternoon, while Martha went downstairs to call the therapist, Isabella sat on the rug with the twins. She spoke softly. "Do you want to learn a secret?" The boys perked up immediately. "What kind of secret?" Gabriel asked, his voice curious. "The kind that helps you see without eyes." They giggled. "That's silly. You can't see without eyes." "Oh, you can," Isabella said. "My brother Nathan used to do it all the time." "Was he blind too?" Michael asked. "Partly, but he could still tell where the sun was or when a bird flew by just by listening." "How?" Gabriel leaned closer. "By feeling how the world changes," Isabella whispered. "Sound changes when there's light. Air feels different when sunshine touches it. Even your skin knows the difference." The twins frowned slightly, trying to understand. "Here," Isabella said, pulling something from her bag. A thin black cloth. She laid it gently over their hands. "Close your eyes tighter. Feel this cloth." "It's warm," Michael said. "Good. Now listen." She stood up, walked to the window, and ever so slightly, just enough to create a tiny gap, pulled one curtain open. A faint beam of sunlight spilled into the room, a thin golden thread stretching across the carpet. The air shifted instantly, warmer, alive. "Now, feel again." Gabriel's eyebrows furrowed. "It's different. How different?" "It's lighter," he said slowly, unsure of his words. "Like, I can hear the light," Michael nodded. "The air hums different. It's like music." A soft laugh escaped Isabella's throat. "Exactly. That's the sound of light. You can feel it, you can hear it, and even if you can't see it." The twins sat very still, as though absorbing that truth deep into their souls. For the first time, they didn't speak or cry. They just listened, to the air, to the warmth, to the world. Isabella didn't open the curtain any wider, just enough for a hint of dawn to touch their world. Then she closed it again, Martha's voice echoed from the hallway. "Boys, time for therapy." Isabella quickly tucked the cloth away, cleaned the window, and smiled at the twins. "Our little secret, okay?" They grinned. "Okay." The house begins to change over the next week. The mansion that once echoed with silence began to fill with small sounds of life. Laughter, soft tapping, even singing. It started with a rhythm game Isabella taught them, call and response using spoons, cups, and boxes. They would tap out patterns and she'd reply with variations. Soon the twins invented their own games, turning sound into a kind of visual art. When Richard returned home late at night, he'd pause in the hallway, puzzled by the faint music drifting through the house. It was foreign but strangely comforting. "Who's teaching them that?" he asked Celia one evening. "The new maid, sir, Isabella." He frowned. "I hired her to clean, not to entertain." "She's careful, sir," Celia said quickly. "And I think it's helping them." Richard hesitated, then sighed. "As long as it doesn't interfere with therapy." He said it like a warning, but something in his eyes had softened. The midnight reflection. That night, Richard found himself standing in the twins' doorway. They were asleep, breathing softly, faces peaceful. He hadn't seen them sleep like that in years. No restless tossing, no quiet tears. He looked around the room and noticed something odd. Their toys, untouched for months, were scattered across the carpet. A small wooden top lay near Gabriel's pillow. It clicked softly when he turned in his sleep. Richard picked it up, turning it in his hand. It was an old toy, handmade, nothing expensive. But when he spun it, it made a gentle, rhythmic sound. He stared at it, realizing something. His sons were playing again. For the first time in years. He smiled. The garden incident. 2 days later, a mild autumn breeze swept across the city. Isabella convinced Celia to let her clean the balcony garden. As she stepped outside, she inhaled deeply. The crisp air, the scent of roses. The Hamilton balcony was stunning, filled with white orchids and climbing vines that Eliza had planted years ago. They had wilted since her passing, neglected like everything else in this house. Isabella gently brushed the leaves and whispered to herself, "You deserve sunlight too." From inside, she heard the twins' voices. "Where are you?" Gabriel called. "Outside," Isabella replied. "Want to join me?" Martha appeared instantly. "Absolutely not. The balcony isn't safe." But before she could continue, Michael's voice interrupted. "We can hold on to the rail, right?" "No," Martha snapped. "It's dangerous," Isabella hesitated. She knew arguing would cause trouble, but something in her heart rebelled. "What if," she said carefully, "we close the balcony door halfway and let them just feel the air? They won't go out." "I'll make sure," Martha huffed. "If Mr. Hamilton finds out, he won't," Isabella said softly, smiling. "It's just air, Martha, not rebellion." Martha rolled her eyes but didn't stop her. Isabella opened the door slightly. The wind rushed in, cool, fragrant, alive. The twins gasped as it touched their faces. "It smells like rain," Gabriel whispered. "And flowers," Michael added. "What's that sound?" "Leaves," Isabella said. "They're dancing." The boys reached out their hands, feeling the current of the air. Gabriel smiled. "I can hear them." "They're waving." "Yes," Isabella said softly, tears forming. "They're saying hello." It was a moment so pure, so full of life, that even Martha didn't have the heart to interrupt. Confrontation, but peace never lasts unnoticed. That evening, when Richard returned from work, Celia hesitated before approaching him. "Sir, there's something you should know." The boys spent part of the afternoon by the balcony. Richard froze. "Outside?" "Not exactly," she said quickly. The door was open. Isabella supervised. He said nothing for a long time. Then, "Tell her I want to speak with her. Now." Minutes later, Isabella stood before him in the study. His expression was hard, but his tone controlled. "You took my sons near the balcony?" "Yes, sir," she said calmly. "But they were safe. I held their hands the entire time." "That's not the point," Richard said sharply. "You were told not to interfere." Her voice didn't tremble. "With respect, sir, I wasn't interfering. I was giving them something they've been missing." "And what's that?" He demanded. "Life," she said simply. "They've been living in darkness for 7 years. You built walls to protect them, but those walls became their prison." His eyes narrowed. "You don't know what I've done for them." "I do," she said quietly. You've given them everything except sunlight. Silence filled the room. For a moment, Richard's mask cracked, pain flashing through his eyes. He turned away. You don't understand. No, she said gently. I think I do. Because I lost someone too. He glanced back, startled. My brother, she continued. He was losing his sight. I tried everything to help him see the world before it was gone. But one day he ran into the street chasing laughter he couldn't find at home. I never forgave myself for keeping him in the dark. Richard's shoulders sank. The anger in him melted into exhaustion. I'm sorry, he muttered, sitting down. Isabella stepped closer. I'm not trying to overstep, sir. I just want them to feel the world again, even if they can't see it. He looked up at her, truly looking for the first time. There was no defiance in her eyes, only compassion. After a long pause, he nodded slightly. Fine, but from now on you tell me first. I will, she promised. The next day, something remarkable happened. When Richard came downstairs, he stopped mid-step. The twins were sitting on the floor laughing, clapping to a rhythm Isabella played on a small keyboard. Morning sunlight brushed the skyline like liquid gold, but the curtains of the Hamilton penthouse remained tightly closed, except for one. In the playroom, a single panel of fabric was drawn open just an inch, enough for a beam of light to fall across the carpet. Two small hands reached out to feel it. It's warmer today, Michael said softly. Gabriel smiled, and brighter. I can tell. Isabella knelt beside them, adjusting the beam so it touched their fingers. Light changes every hour, she whispered. Just like people, the boys giggled. So it's alive? Maybe, she said. Maybe light is how the world breathes. Behind them, the door creaked. Celia stood there, watching and frozen. Miss Johnson, she said in a hushed tone. You opened the curtains? Isabella turned calmly. Only a little. The boys like to feel the warmth. Celia hesitated, torn between admiration and fear. You know Mr. Hamilton's rules. Yes, Isabella said, rising to her feet. But rules should serve people, not the other way around. Celia sighed. You're braver than I'd ever be. Isabella smiled faintly. No, I'm just tired of seeing good people live like ghosts. The echo of laughter. By late afternoon, the twins' laughter had become a rhythm of the household, something no one could ignore. The once sterile hallways echoed with games, singing, and the soft hum of piano notes. Even the staff, long used to quiet efficiency, began to smile more. The chef hummed as he cooked. The guard at the door nodded with warmth when Isabella passed. The only one who didn't change was Martha. She watched Isabella with narrowed eyes, her jaw tight, her posture stiff as iron. To Martha, order was everything. Emotion to her was chaos, and chaos meant danger. So when Isabella began breaking small rules, like leaving a curtain half open, or letting the boys taste new foods without strict supervision, Martha saw rebellion, not healing. That evening, as Isabella tucked the twins in, Martha lingered at the door. You're getting too comfortable, she said coldly. Isabella looked up from the bed. Maybe that's what they need. Comfort. What they need, Martha said, is structure, discipline. Isabella brushed Gabriel's hair gently. They've had enough of both to last a lifetime. The older woman's lips thinned. You think kindness can cure blindness? No, Isabella said softly. But it can cure hopelessness. Martha turned away, her heels clicking hard against the marble, and that sound, sharp, angry, brittle, told Isabella something dangerous was coming. The doctor's visit every Thursday afternoon. Dr. Albert Hensley, a renowned pediatric ophthalmologist, visited the twins for routine evaluation. He was a man of science, silver hair, immaculate suit, eyes that measured everything with cold precision. Richard always made time for these visits, sitting quietly in the background as the doctor performed his tests. Follow my voice, Dr. Hensley said, moving the small bell from left to right. Michael and Gabriel did so perfectly. Good, the doctor murmured. They've improved their auditory tracking. Richard nodded, expression neutral. But no progress in vision? None, Hensley said bluntly. Their retinas remain non-functional. I'm sorry, Mr. Hamilton. Richard exhaled slowly. Thank you, doctor. As he packed his instruments, Dr. Hensley noticed something curious. the faint sunlight spilling from the curtain. He frowned. "You keep this open?" Isabella, standing quietly at the side, answered. "Sometimes, yes. Just a little." "That's unnecessary," the doctor said crisply. "They can't perceive it." "Maybe not with their eyes," Isabella replied, "but they feel it in other ways." He gave her a dismissive glance. "Emotion is not therapy, Miss Johnson," she said. "Well, Miss Johnson," he said, adjusting his glasses, "leave medicine to professionals. Blindness is not cured by warmth or poetry." She didn't argue, just bowed her head slightly. But behind her calm expression, a thought burned bright. Science can measure sight, but it cannot measure light. When the doctor left, Richard turned to her. "You shouldn't challenge him," he said quietly. "He's the best." "I didn't," she said gently. "I just didn't agree." He looked at her for a moment, unsure whether to be angry or impressed. The day of music that Sunday morning. Isabella carried something new into the house. A small wooden drum, hand-painted with bright patterns. The twins' faces lit up the moment they heard it. "What's that?" Gabriel asked. "A talking drum," she said, sitting cross-legged on the floor. "It speaks when you play it right." She struck it lightly. Dum-dum-tack, dum-tack. The boys giggled. "It talks funny." "Now you try." Michael hit it gently, mimicking her rhythm. Gabriel joined, slightly offbeat but full of joy. Soon, the room filled with pulsing sound. Laughter layered over rhythm. Rhythm layered over life. Isabella began humming softly, then singing a lullaby her mother used to sing in church. The melody was soft, full of soul and sunlight. Without realizing it, Richard had stopped in the doorway listening. He didn't interrupt. He didn't even breathe loudly. He just stood there watching his son smile, truly smile. Gabriel suddenly tilted his head. "Papa's here." Richard froze. "How did you—" "I can feel you," Gabriel said proudly. "Your footsteps make the air move different." Richard stared, his throat tight. You can sense that?" Michael nodded. "We can tell when you're sad, too." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Richard stepped forward, knelt beside them, and placed a hand on each of their heads. "I'm not sad," he said softly. "Not anymore." Isabella looked away to hide her tears. For the first time in years, the Hamilton family shared silence that didn't hurt. It was full, not empty, Martha's breaking point, but every light draws a shadow. That evening, while Isabella was cleaning the kitchen, Martha approached Celia in a whisper. "She's manipulating him," she hissed. "And the children." "It's not right," Celia frowned. "Martha, she's helping them." "She's changing things," Martha said bitterly. "Rules, routines, she's undoing everything we built to protect this family." Celia shook her head. "Or maybe she's saving it." Martha's lips pressed thin. "You'll see. Sooner or later she'll cross a line." A dangerous mistake. The next afternoon, Isabella decided to take a small risk. She had noticed how the boys loved identifying spaces through sound, so she thought of a simple exercise, helping them walk from the playroom to the hallway without holding her hand. They used her voice as a guide. "Step, now turn right. Good. Feel the rug under your feet? That means you're close," the twins laughed. "Taking careful steps." "Almost there," she said, holding her breath, but at that very moment, the elevator chimed. Martha stepped out carrying a laundry basket. Startled by the sound, Michael turned sharply, bumped into a chair, and fell. He wasn't hurt, just frightened, but his scream echoed through the house. Within seconds, Richard came running. "What happened?" he shouted. Martha spoke first. "She was letting them walk alone." "Without guidance." Richard turned to Isabella, eyes flashing. "Is that true?" "They were safe," Isabella said quickly. "I was right here. They could have been hurt. I was teaching them independence." "Independence?" he repeated, his voice trembling between anger and fear. "You don't teach my children by risking them." The twins were crying now, clinging to Isabella. "Papa, it was fun," Gabriel sobbed. "We were playing—" "Enough," Richard snapped. The word cut through the air like glass. He took a long breath, then spoke more quietly. "Miss Johnson, take the rest of the day off." Isabella nodded, her voice shaking slightly. "Yes, sir." She turned to the boys. "I'll see you tomorrow, okay?" They clung to her hands. "Don't go," Michael whispered. She smiled faintly. "Only for a little while." When she left, the house felt colder than it had in months. The night of reflection. Richard stood by the window that night, staring at the skyline. His reflection looked back at him, tired, lost, uncertain. He knew he'd overreacted. She hadn't meant harm. But the sight of his son falling, even for a second, had reopened every wound he'd buried. He remembered the day Eliza died. How helpless he felt. How he promised he'd never let harm touch their sons again. Maybe, he realized, he'd taken that promise too far. He turned off the lights and sat in the dark, the faint hum of the city outside. Somewhere deep inside him, a voice whispered, "She's the only one who's made them happy." A knock at midnight. There was a soft knock at the door. Celia entered quietly, holding a cup of tea. "Sir, I know it's late, but there's something you should see." She handed him her tablet. It was the security footage from earlier that day. Richard watched. Isabella standing near the twins, patient, careful, guiding them by voice. They laughed, stepped slowly, safely. Then Martha appeared suddenly. The loud noise startled Michael. It wasn't recklessness. It was an accident. Richard's face softened. "Where is she now?" "In her quarters," Celia said. "Packing, I think. She assumes you'll fire her." He stood abruptly. "Tell her to stay." The reconciliation, when Isabella heard the knock, she expected dismissal, but Richard entered quietly, hands clasped. Expression unreadable. "I watched the footage," he said. She froze. "I understand if you want me gone." He shook his head slowly. "You didn't do anything wrong." Relief flickered in her eyes. He began, then stopped, struggling for words. "I've been afraid so long I forgot what it's like to let them live," she smiled softly. "Fear blinds us more than darkness ever could." He exhaled, the weight on his chest finally lifting. "You've done something no doctor ever could." "What's that?" she asked. "You've made them happy." For a moment no one breathed. The room, once filled only with laughter and sound, now vibrated with something unseen. Awe. Gabriel sat frozen on the carpet, his small hands trembling as they reached toward the window. "There," he whispered again, voice full of wonder. "It's glowing." Michael's face turned toward his brother. "What do you mean?" "You can see it?" Gabriel nodded, eyes wide though unfocused. "Not like pictures, but like fire behind my eyelids. It's warm. It's everywhere." Isabella knelt beside him, her heart pounding so hard she thought it would burst. She didn't dare speak too loudly, afraid that if she did, the fragile thread of the miracle might snap. She took his hand gently. "It's okay, sweetheart. Take a slow breath. Tell me what it feels like," he inhaled shakily. "It's like the world just woke up." A flicker of faith. Richard entered a few minutes later, responding to the commotion. He saw Isabella kneeling beside the boys and his sons' faces turned toward the light. His first instinct was fear that something was wrong again. "What happened?" he demanded, stepping forward. Isabella looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "Sir, Gabriel says he can see light." Richard blinked. "What?" Gabriel turned toward his father's voice. "Papa, it's bright near you." Richard froze where he stood. "Gabriel, you can see me?" "Not you," Gabriel said softly. "But behind you." The light. Richard turned. The curtain was slightly open, letting sunlight pour across the carpet. He looked back at his son, his throat tightening. "You can tell where it is?" "Yes," the boy said simply. "It's warm in my eyes." Isabella swallowed hard. "He's perceiving brightness, Mr. Hamilton. That's not possible according to every doctor, but it's happening." Richard's face paled. Hope, the very thing he'd spent years burying, began clawing its way up again. The test within an hour, the house buzzed with urgency. Richard called Dr. Hensley, the family ophthalmologist. "It's an emergency," he said, voice shaking. "You need to come now." By the time the doctor arrived, Gabriel was sitting calmly, still whispering about the light. Michael sat beside him, half excited, half jealous, but mostly hopeful. Dr. Hensley unpacked his instruments, skeptical from the start. "I understand your concern, but spontaneous recovery of retinal function is unheard of." Richard gestured impatiently. "Just check him." The doctor dimmed the room, then shone a narrow beam into Gabriel's eyes. The boy flinched slightly. "Too bright," he murmured. Hensley paused. He reacted to that. It could be coincidence, Richard said quickly, though his hands trembled. Do it again. The doctor adjusted the beam, directing it left to right. Gabriel's eyes followed, faintly but deliberately. Brighter. Darker. Brighter again, he said quietly. Dr. Hensley lowered the light, staring at him as though the laws of nature had just cracked. This is impossible, he whispered. The optic nerves were declared unresponsive. Richard felt dizzy. But you saw it. The doctor nodded slowly. I did. Isabella covered her mouth, tears spilling silently. News spreads by evening, the entire staff knew. Celia whispered it first, then the chef, then even the security guard downstairs. The Hamilton boy saw light, they said. He saw light after 7 years. Martha's reaction was the opposite of wonder. When she heard, her face went white, then red with fury. You see? This is what happens when rules are broken. False hope! Celia shook her head. But the doctor confirmed it. Coincidence, Martha hissed. Or a mistake. I warned Mr. Hamilton she was dangerous. She's changed those boys' lives, Celia said quietly. Maybe you just can't stand that it wasn't you. Martha glared. You think love replaces medicine? Wait till this illusion breaks, sir. You'll see who cleans up the pieces. The world comes knocking. 2 days later, the story leaked. A hospital technician, fascinated by the case, had spoken carelessly to a journalist. The next morning, headlines appeared online. Billionaire's blind son experiences sudden visual response, medical miracle. By noon, the media surrounded the building. Cameras flashed, drones hovered, reporters called through megaphones. Richard watched it unfold from his office window, heart pounding with dread. He'd spent years protecting his children from the world. Now the world wanted to feast on their miracle. He stormed into the living room. Who leaked this? Celia shook her head helplessly. The hospital, sir. It's everywhere already. He raked a hand through his hair. No one talks to the press again. Understood? Isabella stood silently in the corner. Richard turned to her. I'm sorry. I didn't mean. I know, she said softly. You just want to protect them, he nodded. Always. She looked toward the twins, who were now whispering to each other, oblivious to the chaos outside. Sometimes protection means letting people see their strength. The interview that evening, Dr. Hensley requested one final, private evaluation, away from cameras, just Richard, Isabella, and the boys. He began with routine tests again, but this time he used a device called a flash stimulator, controlled bursts of light. Each time the light pulsed, Gabriel responded immediately. Now. After a few minutes, Dr. Hensley turned off the machine and leaned back, pale. It's real, he said finally. He's registering light. Richard's knees almost gave out. He sank into the chair, covering his face. My son, he whispered. My son sees light. Isabella clasped her hands, tears shining. Thank you, God, Dr. Hensley exhaled heavily. This defies explanation. Retinal cells don't regenerate like this unless... He glanced at Isabella, then at the open curtain. Unless exposure to strong light somehow triggered dormant receptors. Richard frowned. You mean sunlight? Perhaps. Isabella looked down, remembering that first day, the tiny slit she'd opened. The beam that touched their fingers, she whispered to herself. Light found its way in, jealousy and fear that night. When the house was quiet, Martha entered the playroom. The moonlight spilled faintly across the carpet. Isabella had started leaving the curtain slightly open now. Martha stared at the window with contempt. To her, this wasn't healing and it was betrayal, she muttered. He's giving that woman credit for everything. As if she's some miracle worker. She stepped closer to the window and pulled the curtain shut with a snap. From the corner of the room, Michael stirred. Who's there? Go back to sleep, Martha said sharply. Too much light isn't good for you. He frowned. But Gabriel likes it. Gabriel's confused, she said, voice bitter. Miss Isabella fills your heads with nonsense. She left before he could reply, the air thick with unease. A child's courage. The next morning, Gabriel woke early. The room was dark again. For the first time, the absence of light hurt. He crawled toward the window, fumbling for the curtain edge. Michael, he whispered. Help me. His brother sat up. We're not supposed to. I don't care, Gabriel said. I want to feel it again. Together they tugged at the heavy fabric until a small slit opened. Sunlight streamed through, painting their faces gold. Gabriel laughed aloud. It's back. I can feel it. That's how Isabella found them minutes later. Hands stretched toward the beam, faces glowing. What are you two up to? She asked gently. We opened it, Michael said proudly, because the light makes him happy. Isabella knelt down, kissed their foreheads, and whispered, Never be afraid to chase what makes you feel alive. Richard's realization later that day. Richard joined them on the balcony for the first time. He hadn't set foot there in years. The sunlight blinded him for a moment. He wasn't used to it either. The boys were playing with their drum. Isabella was teaching them how to follow rhythm with steps. Gabriel turned when he heard his father's footsteps. Papa, come feel the light. Richard smiled faintly, stepping beside them. The sun touched his face, warm and new. He looked at Isabella, her hair glinting in the sun, her eyes calm, and realized something profound. For years, he'd tried to buy miracles. But the true miracle had walked into his house wearing old sneakers and carrying a bag of cleaning cloths. The test for Michael. A week later, Gabriel's improvement stabilized. He could distinguish light from dark, even sense shadows. But Michael, his twin, remained in total darkness. He tried to hide his envy, but it burned inside him. Why not me? He whispered one night. Isabella sat beside him. Miracles don't choose sides, sweetheart. They take turns. He turned his face toward her voice. But what if mine never comes? She took his hand. Then we'll make our own. Remember, you already see in ways others don't, he smiled faintly. Because I can hear the world? Because you can feel it, she said. That's a kind of sight too. Still, she saw the quiet sadness in him and promised herself she would not rest until both boys felt the light. A public spectacle. Despite Richard's attempts to protect them, the media frenzy continued. Offers poured in, interviews, documentaries, hospital research proposals. One journalist managed to slip past security and shout questions through the lobby doors. Mr. Hamilton, is it true your maid cured your son? That word, maid, pierced Richard like a blade. That night, he called a family meeting. Celia, Martha, and Isabella stood before him. I've decided to withdraw from the public eye until this settles, he said firmly. No one outside speaks about the boys. Martha crossed her arms. And what about her? She nodded toward Isabella. The press is calling her a miracle worker. It's embarrassing. Richard's voice hardened. It's also true, Martha gasped. You're letting her take credit. I'm giving her credit, he said sharply. She brought life back to this house. The room went silent. On the day, everything shined. The first light of morning spilled across Manhattan like melted gold. Inside the Hamilton penthouse, it didn't stop at the curtains, it entered. Every window was open now. Every corridor breathed. Michael and Gabriel stood side by side near the balcony doors, their faces lifted toward the dawn. Their eyes, still clouded, still fragile, blinked in rhythm with the pulse of sunlight that warmed the marble. I can feel it, Michael whispered. Gabriel nodded. It's brighter than yesterday. Isabella smiled from behind them, her hands resting gently on their shoulders. Each morning the world grows a little braver, she said. When Richard appeared in the doorway, he stopped. Not because the view stunned him, but because they did. For years he had imagined what they might look like if they could see. He never realized that the truer miracle was simply watching them live. Good morning, Papa, they said together. He walked to them, kneeling between his sons. Good morning, my light. The return of faith. Later that morning, Dr. Hensley returned with a small medical team. This time there were no cables, no flashing monitors, no sterile walls. He wanted only to observe what science could not fully name. Look toward the window, Gabriel, he said softly. Gabriel obeyed. It's warm. Now close your eyes. It's darker. Dr. Hensley smiled, humbled. You are perceiving what we once believed impossible. He turned to Richard. I've been a doctor 40 years. I can't explain this, but it happened. Sometimes healing hides inside love, and love pretends to be light. Richard grasped the man's hand. Thank you for not being afraid to believe what you saw. The storm of the world by noon. The miracle had traveled again. News vans lined the street. Headlines screamed of faith and science collide in billionaire's home. Some called it divine. Others, delusion. Richard stood at the window watching reporters swarm the gates below. Why can't they just let us be? He murmured. Because light attracts eyes, Isabella said gently. even when it's private, he sighed. Then we'll choose how they see it. That evening he released a statement, not a press release, but a letter. My son's story belongs to every family who has been told hope is foolish. Sometimes medicine stops where miracles begin. Sometimes the miracle is not sight, but the courage to keep loving the unseen. The world quieted. For once. Martha's confession. That night, Martha knocked softly on Isabella's door. When it opened, she stood there, pale but resolute. I owe you something, she said. An apology and gratitude. Isabella frowned gently. You don't owe me anything. I do. I was cruel because I was afraid. I called your hope dangerous, and now it's the only thing keeping me breathing. You've given those boys a life I never believed possible. Isabella stepped closer, taking the older woman's hands. You protected them when no one else could. You kept them alive long enough for light to find them. That is love. Martha's eyes glistened. Would you mind if I stayed on? As long as they'll have me, Isabella smiled. We still need someone to remind us when dinner's burning. They both laughed, and in that laugh, 7 years of tension dissolved like dust in sunlight. The foundation of light months later, the Hamilton residence had changed forever. It was no longer a fortress. It was a beacon. Richard had transformed one wing into a therapy and education center for visually impaired children. He named it the Lighthouse Project, and he appointed Isabella as its first director. The goal was simple: to teach children how to navigate darkness with confidence and families how to open light safely. Doctors from across the country visited. Parents wrote letters, and in every corner, laughter returned as the house's native language. One afternoon, a journalist asked Richard what inspired the foundation. He answered simply, "A maid who taught my sons to see with their hearts before their eyes." The second sunrise winter melted into spring. On the anniversary of the first light, the family gathered on the terrace. The twins, now 8, held small drums in their hands. Isabella sat between them. Richard and Martha stood nearby. They played a rhythm they had invented, soft, steady, rising. Each beat matched the pulse of the city waking below. When the sun climbed high enough, both boys tilted their heads and smiled. Michael whispered, "It's different again." "What's different?" Isabella asked. "It's colored," he said slowly. "I don't know the name yet," Gabriel nodded. "It feels like blue." Isabella's throat tightened. She reached for Richard's hand. "It's a start," she whispered. He squeezed gently. "It's everything." The letter to tomorrow. That night, Isabella sat at her small desk, writing by the same faint light that had started it all. To Nathan, you once told me that light finds cracks. You were right. It found 2 boys who had never seen a sunrise and made them believe in one. If love can do that, then maybe nothing in this world is truly blind. Your sister, Isabella. She folded the letter and placed it inside her old wooden box, the same one she'd carried from Brooklyn to Manhattan. Next to it lay the clicking toy top, worn smooth with memory. The eternal light days later, Richard stood alone on the balcony at dusk. The city shimmered beneath him, thousands of windows lit like small prayers. Behind him he heard laughter, the same music that once felt impossible. He closed his eyes and smiled. "Thank you," he whispered to no one and to everyone. Inside, Isabella helped the boys prepare for bed. Gabriel tugged her sleeve. "Miss Isabella?" "Yes, dear." "When we sleep, does the light sleep too?" She smiled. "No, sweetheart. It just waits for morning." In the final scene. The next morning, the Hamilton penthouse awoke before the sun. Isabella opened every curtain herself. She turned to find Richard watching her, smiling. "Old habits die bright," he joked. She laughed softly. "Then let's keep this one." The twins ran into the living room, their feet quick, their faces turned toward the window. They stopped in the glow that filled the room. Gabriel whispered, "It's here again." Michael added, "It never left," and outside. The city shimmered, not because of wealth or fame, but because one family had learned how to let the world in.